Hey guys, this is going to be your second video for the week of April the 20th. This is going to be Unit 5, Week 5. And this week we've been talking about the big question, why are rules important? And so we talked about how the kids were going on a field trip in the last story, and how the picture showed them lining up. And they were waiting in line because that is what the teacher asked them to do. So our question was, why are rules important? And some of the things that we talked about was that rules keep us safe, and rules help us to accomplish what we need to get done in an orderly fashion. So the kids were able to wait for their teacher getting off the school bus because they were waiting in a line and they were waiting safely. And so rules keep us safe. And we talked about that rules are very important in all areas, and that you might have rules at home, you may have rules in a restaurant, you may have rules riding on the school bus, and your rules can be different depending on where that you are or what you might be doing. But all of those rules are very important. And so when we talked about our past, the last story that we looked at talked about some people that were visiting places that told them about our past. And our country, America, has a past. We have a history. And as we learn about our history, we know that our fathers that created our nation, our founding fathers that created the United States of America, that established America here, they come up with a set of rules. And those rules were very important because they kept us safe, but they also protect our rights. And remember that we said our rights are our freedoms that we have. So the last story, we looked at the Chang family, and we wrote some things on the board as we read the story about the Chang family. And one of the things that we asked ourselves was, why were they learning about the past, or why were they trying to find out about the past? And one of the facts from the story said that the Chang family visited Philadelphia. And because they visited Philadelphia, we wanted to know what happened while they were visiting Philadelphia. We asked ourselves that question, what happened? And these are some things that we found out. They were able to see many historic places, many historic sites in Philadelphia. So they were able to learn about all different kinds of places in our history that are special to our past. And one of the things that we also learned was that our government was first established in Philadelphia. And so our main government now is in Washington, D.C. And so we talked about, as they visited Philadelphia, they were able to see some of the very first historic sites in our nation. Cause and effect were two of the words that we talked about as we looked at the facts from the book. Remember, a cause tells us why something happened. The effect is what happened. Here's a couple of other examples that we could think about with cause and effect. Here might be the cause. I left the milk out of the refrigerator. So I might ask myself to find out the effect. What happened? I left the milk out of the refrigerator. So what happened? What would the effect be of leaving the milk out? Right. It would ruin. It wouldn't be any good. The milk would spoil. So my cause was I left the milk out. What caused the milk to spoil? I left it out. What happened to the milk because I left it out? The milk spoiled. So you can see that in a story, you can have a cause and effect relationship. When an event occurs, it can cause something else to happen. Here's another example that you might can relate to about school. I didn't do my homework. If I didn't do my homework, what might happen? What would the effect be of not doing my homework? That's right, I might get in trouble, and there might be some kind of consequence. I might miss PE, or I might get a 0 on that paper or that assignment. So getting the 0 or missing PE would be the effect. That's what happened because I forgot my homework. Forgetting the homework was why I got the 0 or why I missed PE. That was the cause. That's what caused me to miss PE. I didn't do my homework. So those are some examples to think about when you read a story. A lot of times there will be a relationship of events that happen. Something will happen and it will cause other things to happen. And those are called cause and effect. Remember that cause tells us why, like the word because explains why. And the effect is what? It tells me what happened. So let's look at our story for this week or for today. It's called Setting the Rules. I'm on page 480 in my large reading book. And I can see at the top of the page, it tells me already that this story, like my last story, is an expository text. Remember that an expository text is very important because it gives me facts and information about real places or real events. Another example of a characteristic of an expository text is that it contains photos, captions, and charts or graphs. It's going to show that information in an easy to see way. I have headings that tell me about each section that I will be reading about. If you notice, these are real photographs that are in the story, and there are captions that tell under each photograph what the photograph is. And so I can tell already that I'm going to be reading some true information, real facts and real information about our country. This is called Setting the Rules. So I'm going to be learning a little bit about the rules and the laws that helped set up our country. My essential question is still the same: why are rules important? And we've already discussed that. But one of the things that I want you to think about as we read this story is how the Constitution sets the rules for our country. How does the Constitution set the rules for our country? So that tells me we need to be listening for that word Constitution as I read, and we need to think about what the Constitution is and how it is related to the rules of our country. Are you ready? Who came up with the rules for our country? Your parents vote. You can say what you think about a new law. People in your neighborhood can have a meeting. You are free to believe whatever you want. You can thank the Constitution for all of these things. There's that word, Constitution. That tells me that the word Constitution has to do with our rights or our freedoms that we talked about earlier. We have the right to vote. We have the right to make new laws. We have the right to hold a meeting, to believe however we want to. I can go to church. I can go where I want to believe and how I want to believe. All of these things are part of the Constitution. And remember, we talked about in the last story that our rules have changed over time. Remember that we haven't always had the same rules and laws or the same freedoms. But this story is going to tell us a little bit about how our laws came to be. In 1787, a group of men met in Philadelphia. They thought the country needed a better government because each state had its own rules. They wanted to create a united government that would work together. They decided to form a new set of rules called the Constitution. Everyone in the country would follow these rules. Creating the Constitution. The writers of the Constitution included George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, and other state leaders. They were called framers because they framed or planned the rules. Okay, let's go back to our question in the beginning. Who came up with the rules for our country? Who were some of the men that you just heard? George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison. Those were some of the names of the people that were framers, or they planned our rules. How do you think the framers formed the Constitution? How did they do that? They probably had meetings. They probably met together and talked about what they were concerned about. They probably thought about some things that were important for us to have, and they wrote down their ideas and they talked about their ideas together. So they came up with our rules. Do you think that they always agreed? You know, I'm sure you've worked in groups in our class before, and you know that it's hard for everyone to agree all the time, isn't it? Everyone has their own opinions. So I bet it was hard for them to come up with the Constitution. What do you think? What are you thinking about how long it took them, or how easy it might have been for them to come up with the rules? I bet they had a hard time deciding. The framers didn't always agree. They often exclaimed loudly that they would not sign the new rules and make them official. Finally, after 4 months of debate, the framers agreed on the rules. The Constitution is now the highest law of the United States. It explains the rules of the country, and it tells how our government works. It gives rights or privileges to all the people. So here's a picture of the Constitution right here, and this is the official document, and you can see it looks very old, doesn't it? So it took them 4 months. That was a long time. The Constitution. The Constitution isn't just about our nation's past history or its current rules. The document has become a symbol. Like the American flag, it stands for freedom and liberty. You know, a symbol is something that stands for something else. It represents something else. If I see a bobcat symbol with an MC beside of it in blue and gold, that reminds me of McNary Central because they're known for that symbol, the MC, McNary Central, and the blue and gold bobcat symbol reminds me of that school, that team. You know, if I see an orange T, that reminds me of the University of Tennessee or UT football or the university there. You know, there are symbols that represent lots of different things, and I'm sure when you see a symbol, you notice exactly what that is, if it's something familiar to you. Our country has lots of different symbols, and we're going to learn about some of them today. One of them is the American flag, and it represents the United States. Another symbol, it says, has become the Constitution. It's a symbol of our country. Another symbol was in our last story. It was the Liberty Bell. Do you remember seeing the picture of the bell? The Liberty Bell. They would ring it for different meetings that they would have, or when the president would come to speak. So it's became a symbol of our country also. It tells me in the caption that you can see the Constitution at the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. I've been to Washington, D.C., and I've seen the Constitution. I think I've talked to you about that in class before. If you remember, I said that it's a very important document because you can't replace it. It's kind of like a photograph from the past that you couldn't go back and recreate that if something happened to it. You know, it's very special because it happened at that time, and it was signed by all those men that are no longer alive. So we couldn't make a new Constitution. It wouldn't be the same. So they have it in under protective glass and in a case that's very special, and it's locked up. You can't even touch it, but you can go up and look at it. There are even guards that stand guard and guard it so that no one tries to steal it. So our country is very proud of that document, the Constitution. Adults have the right to vote. You have the right to say your idea or to express your opinions. We have the right to live safely in our homes, These rights are explained in the Constitution. So some of those things that we get to do that help us to have the freedoms that we have are all written out in that Constitution. So that's very important to us. Changing with time. Over time, the Constitution has changed. Some rules have been added to the original document to help make life better or safer for the public. The first 10 rules added are called the Bill of Rights. They name the rights that belong to the people of America. Another change that came later on gave the women the right to vote. So far, there have been 27 changes to the Constitution. That's why it's known as a living document, because it can constantly change. It can be changed or updated at any time. You know, we talked about that earlier, that we haven't always had the same rights and freedoms that we have today. And so one of the things that we discussed was women the right to vote. So when this Constitution was updated, women gained their right to vote, and it was added in later on. So those are some things that we can think about and be thankful for, that we can have the right to vote and make changes as the laws need to be. Here's another document, and it says you can also see the Bill of Rights. So this is a document of the Bill of Rights at the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. So the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are there in Washington, D.C., and they are kept safe, remember, behind glass in a case so that people can go and look at them. But they're also there as a symbol of our history and of our past. Think about this story and what it means for us as Americans. It's part of our history, and we need to understand the rules that we have and how much hard work went into planning our rules and our government. You know, it took them a long time to decide on just the right laws, and so I think that's pretty special. On the next page, here are some of those symbols that I was talking about. These are symbols that are pretty popular. You've probably seen most of them before, but these are symbols that are American symbols. And when you think of the United States, what images come to your mind? Well, these are probably some of the things you think about. I think about the American flag, the Statue of Liberty. Here's the White House, the Liberty Bell. We talked about that earlier. The Constitution. And there's a smaller picture of the Statue of Liberty. Do you picture the Statue of Liberty? How about the White House? These buildings and other important places and papers are national symbols. Here's a look at some famous symbols. Can you think of some others? Maybe that are not on this page. Can you think of something? There's lots of things. So I think we talked about the Washington Monument before. We've talked about the Lincoln Memorial. All of those are important symbols of our nation's history. Here's the White House. The caption says, "The White House has been the home for every U.S. president except George Washington. He laid the first stone, but the first president to move into the White House was actually John Adams. The White House has become a symbol of the American president." The Liberty Bell. The Liberty Bell was originally ordered as a bell for the Independence Hall. That is where the people who formed the Constitution met. The crack in the bell is more than 2 feet long. So there's actually a crack in this bell, and it goes down the middle. And that's one of the characteristics of the bell. It's 2 feet long. Just like its name, the bell symbolizes liberty. The Constitution. The Constitution is a document that tells the rights and the rules of the people who live in the United States. It's kept under special glass in a building that is home to many famous documents. The Constitution stands for freedom and liberty. The Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty was a gift from France for the 100-year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, but there wasn't enough money to complete it in time. The statue was not put up until 10 years after the anniversary. That took a long time, didn't it? It is a symbol of freedom and hope. All of these symbols are very important to our national capital. And now our capital is not in Philadelphia, but it's actually in Washington, D.C. So here's a map. And if you can see behind these symbols is a map of the United States. And there's a star. Remember we said that the star represents a capital on a map, a capital city. So Washington, D.C. is the place where you can find these symbols. The Statue of Liberty is actually in New York. So these are some rules that were important, that were established in our past by people that were very famous that you may have heard about. Remember the men that we talked about? They're very important to our past. George Washington is a very important member of our past and our history to the United States. Not only was he the first president, but he helped to write the Constitution. So as we think about why rules are important, we know that they are there to keep us safe and to help protect our rights and our freedoms. And we want to be thankful for the men that come up with the rules and the freedoms for our country so that we can live each day and be safe. We can go to school and we don't have to worry about being harmed. We can do that with freedom. We can be at home and go to bed safely, and we can play and do all the things that we do safely because we know that our rights and our freedoms are protected. So I want you to remember this week to think about rules and think about our past. And remember that an expository text is a story that gives us real facts and information about an event or a place. It contains photographs with captions that tell about the picture. It contains charts or graphs that gives us special information. Sometimes it might even have a timeline to give us different events in the order that they happened. Another thing that we talked about this week is cause and effect. Remember, the cause is why something happens, and the effect is what happens because of the cause. Some of the examples we talked about in the first story was the Chang family visited Philadelphia. Well, what happened because they visited Philadelphia? They saw many historical sites. Some of the things that I told you to help you better understand cause and effect was the homework example. I didn't do my homework. That's a cause. The effect, what happened? What happened when I didn't do my homework? Well, I probably got in trouble, or I had to miss out on something that was special, PE, or I might have made a bad grade. So a cause and an effect are two things that are related to each other. One thing tells why something happened, the other one tells what happened. I want you to remember that. It's very important because when you read a story, it might help you to understand how that character acts. To know the cause, you can predict the effect. And it might help you to predict what happens next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.